Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Pokemon Adventures Podcast, a short from the Every Pokemon Episode Ever podcast that I do with my good old pal, Dougie Fresh. I am your host, Professor Chris G, and we are on Chapter 12 this week, everybody, and this week's chapter is called Wake Up, Your Snorlax. So what I like to do at the beginning of every single one of these podcasts is kind of give a background as to what happened on last week's episode if you just happened to miss it. Last week's episode saw the battle between Lieutenant Sarge and Red, where Red seemingly, I guess, kind of defeated Lieutenant Sarge, but before they could capture him, Lieutenant Sarge was able to escape, but the police were there and they did arrest everybody that was on the boat trafficking Pokemon. And at the end, we saw the little Pokemon professor dude, the head of the Pokemon Fan Club, that his Abra has evolved into an Alakazam, and he was heartbroken. And then fast forward, and we are on Route 11 now, and we literally went from the scene of the old man fainting to what looks like Red is getting ready to perform in a Pokemon race. So if you are following with us, everybody, this is where we are going to start this week's show. And again, this is Chapter 12. Wake Up, Your Snorlax. And the gun sounds, and all of our racers are off, and you hear, go! And Red is just huffing and puffing, and he's trucking along on his bike. He's like, I really want that first prize. I even paid a 30 smacker entry fee to get into this race. So he paid 30 Pokédollars to get into this race in order to win the grand prize, everybody. And he's just trucking along. He's like, but I can't get up any speed. He's like, what's with this stupid bike? And then we find out in the next tile, he's like, maybe borrowing a bike from that Fan Club wasn't such a good idea. He's like, oh, geez, look how far behind I am. Maybe I should just drop out now. And then as he's going forward, everyone is just like, easy. And then Red's like, he's like, what are they all bunched up over here for? And he's like, it's just a river. Why are you crossing one at a time? And one of the other contestants, he's like, take a look. And Red kind of looks into the water. He's like, oh my gosh. And there's a whole bunch of Tentacruel inside of the river that they're crossing. And Tentacruel, as we know, are very, very, very poisonous, and they can sting you. He's like, no way, this isn't fair. And then another contestant's like, sure it is. And then we go to the next panel, and we have this swimmer who's so confident, number 20 we will call him, since he has a number 20 pasted on his chest. He's like, haven't you ever raced in the Tri-Pokemon before? This isn't just a race, it's a Pokemon obstacle course. And he's like, and for obstacles like this, you're allowed to use your own Pokemon. So, see ya! And then we see the swimmer is swimming away on what looks to be like a Slowbro, like an early drawing of a Slowbro. And Red's like, all right, I can win this thing. For starters, and then you see Red just splashing along right across the river. He goes, Poliwrath, Ice Beam Bridge! And Poliwrath just makes a little ice bridge for Red as they cross over to the other side, and all the contestants are like, whoa. And Red's like, give me a 5, Poliwrath. And then we jumped to the next panel. He's like, man, we've gained a lot of ground. If we keep going like this, and then he takes a look. He's like, hey, where does that guy think he's going? And then we see a guy taking another path in the race, which looks like it's going to be the long way around. And Red's like, oh, well, that's his problem. I'm one obstacle closer to. And he's like, oh. And then we get a dum dum dum. He's like, a forest? So he has come up to a forest in the middle of the race. And Red is like, man, this is a thick one. No way I can ride through that. No wonder everybody else is going around it. He's like, guess I'll just have to do the same. And then all of a sudden he sees another racer and he's like, hey! And that other racer is getting ready to walk through this forest. And he's like, Red's like, you're going through there? And we find out it's Bug Catcher. He's like, I know a shortcut. He's like, another chance to move up. And then the Bug Catcher's like, don't try it. The forest is infested with bug Pokemon. It'll be a long shortcut for you, as the Bug Catcher is spraying a bunch of bug spray all over his body. And Red's like, oh, yeah. And the Bug Catcher, and then we see that he has a Scyther to cut down all the tall grass in the next frame. He's like, if you don't have bug spray, you better stay out. See ya. And then Red's like, who's afraid of some bugs? Let's go. And then from there, he's just flying through this big forest. He's like, I've got an electric Pokemon that'll fry all of them. And then we see Pikachu just frying a Butterfree, a Venonat, a Venomoth, as he's just racing through this forest. He's like, oh yeah. And then he throws out Bulbasaur. Hey, Bulbasaur, open a path with your Razor Leaf. And then Bulbasaur uses its Vine Whip and its Razor Leaf, and it's cutting through the forest. He's like, this race is ours. And then all of a sudden we hear, and Red's like, huh? And then in the next frame, we see that a beehive has splatted right on top of Bulbasaur's head. And Red's like, a Beedrill's hive. And that must mean... And then right behind Red, there's a whole bunch of Beedrill. And the Beedrill are out for blood in this next frame. And then they just start chasing Red. And Red's like, oh no! The next frame, we see all the Beedrill have had a turn to sting good old Red, because his face is swollen with a whole bunch of stings all over his face, on the top of his head, and then he has 3 little lumps on his arm. So these Beedrill just had a field day with good old Red. And then we see him exiting the forest, and he's like, every shortcut has a big price. And then he looks behind him, he's like, but look where we are. And we get a map side view that Red is now ahead in the Pokemon race. He's like, last leg, guys, let's roll. And Red is looking over at Bulbasaur, who still has honey on top of his head. He's looking at Pikachu. He has Poliwrath. And everybody just jumps on the bike. He's like, you've been great, but from here on, this is my race. I'm going to win this myself. Then we go to the next frame, and the announcer's like, and they're approaching the finish line. Battling for the lead are Swimmer and Bug Catcher, while surprising, third is this youngster. And then it's a picture of Red on the big screen. Which of them will be the winner? Who will be the one to take home all these Pokemon items and 10,000 in prize money? So that is what Red is after, is that prize money. And we just see Red just going straight after the finish line. But as he's approaching this bridge, it looks like we are on Route 12, the fishing pier. And any of you that have played Pokemon Red, Blue, or Green version, or even Yellow version, you know what this means. There's a big blob in the middle of the bridge. And then we catch up to the swimmer and bug catcher. And Red's like, what the heck is that? And as he pulls up, he's like, what's going on? Swimmer's like, looks like we're tied for nothing. And bug catcher's like, we'll never get past this. And Red looks up and he's like, weird. How to Boulder get out here? And he looks up all the way. He's like, whack! It's a Snorlax! He's like, they can sleep forever. Nothing's waking them up. And then he's like, then we'll just have to capture it. Poliwrath, I choose you. And Poliwrath goes right on in to tackle this Snorlax. And then he goes, blung! He literally hits it and just flies right off of the Snorlax. And Red's like, huh? And not Snorlax, and Poliwrath is down for the count. And Bugcatcher is like, you don't think we tried already? And Swimmer's like, no matter what we do, the Snorlax sleeps right through it. And then we have Swimmer on the next panel. He's like, only one thing will wake up a Snorlax, and that's food. And Red's like, oh, so that's how it is. Food. Well, here goes nothing. And Red's like, hey, Snorlax, how about a snack? And then we have Swimmer and Bugcatcher like, what? As Red takes out his Bulbasaur, who still has honey slathered all over him, and he puts Bulbasaur right in the air. And he looks over at Bulbasaur because Bulbasaur's like, what are you doing? And Red's like, it's okay, Bulbasaur, I promise. And at this point, Snorlax wakes up because it smells the honey. And Red's like, come on, can't you smell it? It's Beedrill honey. And Snorlax starts licking its lips. And then we jump to the next panel, which says this is soon, which means that we're just a little bit further than what we were just looking at. And the announcer's like, I can see the leaders approaching. Can't make them out yet. There they are. Let's hear some cheers for our next win. Huh? That's not a bike. And then we go to the next panel and we see Red is gunning it on his bike with Pikachu on his back and Bulbasaur in the front. But right behind him is big old Snorlax just pounding his way, just boom, 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 just chasing after Red because he wants that honey off of Bulbasaur's head. And the announcer's like, what is that thing? And then all of a sudden, it's a photo finish. Boom! And the winner is And we jump to the next panel, and Red's like, I can't believe it. The 10,000 in prize money, and it took every cent to fill up that stupid Snorlax. And Snorlax is sitting there, and he is just chowing away at all of the food, which, I mean, I don't get it. I mean, because Red still got the money, unless he actually had to pay 10,000 for more food than what was on that table. But he just looks so defeated, and it's at this point that Pikachu, Bulbasaur, and Poliwrath are all celebrating. Snorlax is eating the food, and Red is just there all by himself. I mean, he won the race, but he has nothing to show for it because Snorlax is eating all of it. And that is the end of this chapter, everybody. And that's where we are going to leave it for this week, because next week's chapter is Psy for Psyduck. So it's that time, everybody, for all the plugs in this week's episode. Make sure you follow us at PokeBreakdown on Twitter. At this point, if you are listening to this episode on the free feed, the entire first volume and part of the second volume is already out there for you to listen to on the Patreon. Go ahead and go on patreon.com/everypokemon and subscribe to one of our many tiers that we have. We have a manga only section for only $5, everybody. If you want to listen to only the manga, or for just a little bit more, you can get the Pokemon episodes that I do with Doug, our main weekly podcast, along with the movies. So make sure you go on Patreon and you go and subscribe. But other than that, everybody, I want to thank you for downloading this episode. I hope you guys are really enjoying these Pokemon Adventure shorts. And we will end up getting together next week for another brand new episode of the Pokemon Adventures podcast, a short from the Every Pokemon Episode Ever podcast that I do with good old Dougie Fresh. My name is Professor Chris G, and I am signing out, and I will see you again next week, everybody. Have a good night.